Great. So again, thank you all for joining us here tonight. I am very excited for this virtual program, a visit with the Museum of Fine Arts, Women Take the Floor. Inspired by the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, this digital tour highlights works by women artists from 1920s up to present day, now displayed in a special exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts. And again, it's called Women Take the Floor. This exhibition challenges the dominant history of 20th century American art by focusing on the overlooked and underrepresented work and stories of women artists. This reinstallation or takeover of level 3 of the Art of the Americas wing advocates for diversity, inclusion, and gender equity in museums, the art world, and beyond. And tonight's virtual program is led by Laura Carlton, a senior associate guide and volunteer at the Museum of Fine Arts. Laura has over 5 years of experience leading tours highlighting the MFA collections. She has led talks for special exhibits, member events, and community celebrations. Laura lives in Tewksbury and enjoys rowing, biking, reading, movies, and spending time with family and friends. And again, I want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences and the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners for funding tonight's event. So all 30 of us or so watching live, and I'm sure there'll be a couple dozen more watching on demand. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Laura for joining us here tonight. And Laura, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Robert, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And welcome to the Museum of Fine Arts. My name is Laura Carlton, and I'm here with my colleague and fellow MFA tour guide, Diane Brown, who's on standby just in case of technical difficulties on my end. And she will also be joining me and helping to answer your questions at the end of the tour. So tonight, as Robert said, we're going to visit an exhibition called Women Take the Floor. So let's get started. This is a year of anniversaries. The MFA is celebrating its 150th. And 2020, as Robert said, marks the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, which I understand has very special significance for Tewksbury. I recently learned from Robert that we owe a debt of gratitude for your town for being trailblazers as the only community in Massachusetts to vote in favor of women's suffrage in an 1895 referendum. That's sure something to be proud of. So, Women Take the Floor celebrates the anniversary celebrates this anniversary by turning the spotlight on overlooked and underrepresented women artists. And while the artists and Women Take the Floor are united by gender and the challenges they've faced in the male-dominated art world, they're equally notable for their infinite diversity, which will be apparent as we look at the works of the 8 artists featured on our tour tonight. Just a quick note, art objects featured on this tour belong to the MFA unless otherwise noted. Our first stop is this painting entitled Linda Knocklen and Daisy by the American artist Alice Neal. In this portrait of the distinguished art historian Linda Knocklen with her daughter Daisy, we can see Neal's characteristic blunt and revealing style of portraiture. So let's take a closer look. The composition is very compactly arranged, with the mother and daughter framed by the Victorian sofa. Their arms and legs are parallel, presenting 2 bodies aligned and in sync. We see lots of vibrant color, Knocklen's purple and yellow shirts, the green sofa, Daisy's strawberry blonde hair, and her bright red shoes. The eyes are said to be an open window to the soul. And in this portrait, Alice Neal has captured Knocklen's shrewd and knowing gaze, as Daisy peers out at the viewer with eyes wide open, bright and expectant. Their hands are exaggerated, the long, thin fingers of their left hands resting side by side on the sofa. Daisy's right hand rests on her knee, while her mom's is placed protectively on her lap. Neal even captured the large ring on Knocklen's left hand. Thus, Neal has focused our attention on her subjects' most expressive features, their eyes and their hands. Notice Neal's gestural brushstrokes, which are broad and visible, which animate the painting, and we can see this in the folds and wrinkles of the clothing. And we can see her very deliberate brushwork in the shading on the faces, which is stark and angular with abrupt transitions of color. This is most evident in the rendering of Knocklen's face. Neal captures her subjects with disarming frankness. By including Daisy, she's acknowledging the central role of motherhood in the lives of women. The overall effect is an immediacy and familiarity that are more akin to a snapshot than the staged compositions typical of formal portraiture. Alice Neal felt a kinship with her subject, Linda Knocklen, who wrote a groundbreaking 1971 feminist essay, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" The essay brought to light societal and institutional barriers that women artists have faced throughout history. Knocklen's essay includes this quote, "But in actuality, as we all know, things as they are and as they have been in the arts, as in 100 other areas, are stultifying, oppressive, and discouraging to all those, women among them, who did not have the good fortune to be born white, preferably middle class, and above all male. The fault lies not in our stars, our hormones, our menstrual cycles, or our empty internal spaces, but in our institutions and our education." Among other obstacles, Knocklen pointed out that for much of history, even if a woman were admitted to an art school, she was prohibited from participating in life drawing classes, which were fundamental to a classical arts education. And that's why in Thomas Aiken's 19th century drawing class at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, a cow rather than a male nude served as a model for the women artists. The battles that Knocklen addressed in her essay were definitely not unfamiliar to the artist who painted this large canvas. Lois Mailou Jones faced discrimination both as a woman and as an African American. This is Ubi Girl from Tai Region, painted by Jones in 1972. Look closely and you can see that Jones has composed this painting in several layers, with the images appeared to be stacked on top of one another. In the foreground, we see the portrait of a striking young girl from the Tai region of Liberia. Her face is painted for her initiation into womanhood. She's painted realistically with closed eyes and a solemn expression. Red and white paint covers much of her face, and her hair is outlined in a river of blue. The next layer, below and slightly behind the young girl, is composed of two mirrored Congolese masks. Note how the similar red lines of the masks and those on the young girl's face are unifying elements of the composition. The eyes of the mask are collaged with gold foil paper. A profile of a fetish, an object with magical powers, peeks from behind the girl in the masks, separated by a swath of purple. Representing an idealized female spirit, the fetish has strong sculptural features that appear to have been carved out of dark wood. And all of these powerful female images are painted against a background of strong geometric shapes and patterns in bright primary colors, recalling African textiles. For Lois Mailou Jones, this painting represents a reclamation of her own African heritage following a trip she took to Africa in the 1970s, a trip that had a profound effect on her art as well as her sense of her own identity. Ubi Girl illustrates the evolution in Jones' work away from Western realism and toward the bold pattern and bright colors of non-Western abstraction. This evolution is evident when we compare Ubi Girl to an earlier painting from 1932 entitled Portrait of Hudson, a sensitive portrayal of one of Jones's students. She painted Portrait of Hudson in her initially impressionistic style, while Ubi Girl, painted 40 years later, shows her transition to a style that is graphic, colorful, and symbolic. Lois Mailou Jones was born in Boston and educated at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. When she applied for a teaching position at the school, she was dismissively told to go south and help her people. She eventually joined the faculty at Howard University in Washington, D.C., where she taught for nearly 40 years. And take a close look at the photograph on the left. While most artists would be distracted by a constant presence, looking over their shoulders, Jones seemed to be fine with the attentive gaze of her feline critic. Lois Mailou Jones was critically acclaimed throughout her long career. She was honored by President Jimmy Carter in 1980, and closer to home, she was the first woman and the first Black artist to have a one-person show at the MFA. Like Jones, identity and heritage were important inspirations for our next artist. Now, I know that when I began this tour, I introduced Women Take the Floor as an exhibition of overlooked and underappreciated women artists. The artist who painted this double portrait, however, is neither of those things. In fact, Frida Kahlo is one of the most recognized women artists in contemporary times. She's in this exhibition because her story and her art are great inspirations for women artists. This is Dos Mujeres, Salvadora y Armenia, painted by Frida Kahlo in 1928. Dos Mujeres means two women in Spanish. So what do we see? Two women stand before a background of dense green foliage. There's a sense of quiet dignity about these two women. They stand very close, their bodies overlapping. The slight turn of their heads, their high cheekbones and full lips and intense gazes are similar. Their hairstyles, facial features, and bright clothing suggest that these two women are these are two indigenous Mexican women. The leafy green foliage in the background is less a physical setting than a stylized background, providing a soft, muted contrast to the clearly delineated figures of the two women. Notice the two butterflies and two Mexican limas that animate the background and echo the pairing of the two women. So, who were Salvadora and Armenia? Kahlo painted Dos Mujeres 3 years after she was seriously injured in a bus accident. This painting is Kahlo's personal tribute to Salvadora and Armenia, women who worked in the home of Kahlo's mother and cared for Kahlo during her long recuperation from the accident. Kahlo made this sketch of the accident, depicting her bandaged body on a stretcher, with her boyfriend, who was with her on the bus but uninjured, looking on. Now, one thing we know about Frida Kahlo is that her artwork is very personal, always grounded in her own experiences. Perhaps this sketch is where that all began. Kahlo had great affection for and admiration for these women, as we can see in her dignified portrayal of them. She presents them as two proud individuals, rather than as household servants. In fact, X-ray images suggest that she originally included aprons on the women, and it's thought that she painted over them to erase any evidence of servitude. This quietly heroic representation of two indigenous working women reflects Kahlo's communist sympathies, celebrating the nobility of the working class. Painted when Kahlo was 21, Dos Mujeres is simpler and more straightforward than her later paintings, many of which were self-portraits, with often intensely personal and graphic imagery. For example, let's look at one of her most famous paintings, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, painted in 1940, 12 years after she painted Dos Mujeres. The symbolism in this painting is quite stark. A thorn necklace symbolizes Kahlo's physical and emotional pain. The dead hummingbird is a symbol of its demise as a harbinger of good luck. And the monkey and black cat portend evil and bad luck, respectively. Looking at the two paintings side by side, we can see they have a lot in common. The solemn expressions of the subjects, the leafy backgrounds, the butterflies, the bright opaque colors, and the clearly delineated figures. However, we can sense the innocence and idealism of Kahlo's youth in Dos Mujeres, while the later painting conveys the pain and suffering that clouded Kahlo's life and dominated her art. This portrait of two indigenous Mexican women is also a reflection of Kahlo's interest in indigenous Mexican culture, which figures prominently in her art. And of course, we see it in her adoption of traditional Mexican clothing and hairstyles that would come to define her personal style. Frida Kahlo died in 1954 at the age of 47. Since her death, her reputation has soared. And the persona of Frida Kahlo has taken on a cult-like status as an international icon, a phenomenon known as Frida Mania, which is still going strong. Dos Mujeres was the first painting that Kahlo ever sold, an occasion that is documented on the back of the painting with an inscription that reads, "In memory of a very pleasant evening with the author of the picture," and signatures of the artist, her soon-to-be husband, Diego Rivera, her sister, Christina, her friend, Frances Tour, and the purchaser, American industrialist Jackson Cole Phillips. Dos Mujeres is also the first painting by Frida Kahlo to enter the MFA's collection, and one of only 13 in public museums in the United States. This number is unlikely to grow because her work is now considered cultural patrimony for Mexico. Dos Mujeres, however, has been out of Mexico for a long time, having been brought to the United States by Phillips in 1929. It remained in the Phillips family out of public view until it was sold to the MFA in 2015. And now it's receiving the recognition it deserves with its enthusiastic reception by visitors to the MFA. Frida Kahlo and Carmen Herrera were contemporaries, born in the early years of the 20th century and both from Latin American countries. Their artwork, however, is light years apart. While Kahlo's is deeply personal, emotional, and mostly figurative, Herrera's art is hard-edged, geometric, and rational. This is Blanco y Verde #1, painted by Cuban artist Carmen Herrera in 1962. It's a painting that's really very easy to describe. Two slender, bright green triangles barely touch against an unmodulated white background. The triangles are mirrored forms, creating a perfectly symmetrical arrangement of line, shape, and color. But take a long, close look at this painting. What do you see? For most viewers, the triangular shapes create what seems to be the horizon line of a spare landscape. Imagine a fast-moving car appearing from beyond the horizon and advancing toward us, becoming larger and larger as it fills the space between the two green borders. Or a river stretching into the distance between mountains that rise on either side. Herrera has reduced the elements of the painting to very few variables, the basic geometric shape of the triangles and a palette of just two colors. While it's simple in structure, however, That simplicity comes with a dynamic energy that draws our eyes deep into the center of the painting. Herrera calls her art of a lifelong process of purification, a process of taking away what isn't essential. Her style is abstract, hard-edged, and geometric. She said, "I like straight lines, I like angles, I like order. In this chaos that we live in, I like to put order." So her tools are basically graph paper, straight edges, painter's tape, and acrylic paint in bright primary colors. Herrera created a whole series entitled Blanco y Verde, or White and Green. And here are a few other paintings in that series. This is a timeline of the places where Herrera lived and worked from her birth in 1915 to the present. Herrera first trained as an architect in Havana, Cuba, and architectural theory greatly influenced the direction of her art. She noted that at the university, an extraordinary world opened up to me that never closed, the world of the straight line, which has interested me until this very day. And in this slide and the next, I've juxtaposed Herrera's paintings and architectural drawings. And it's not a stretch to see the influence of architecture on Herrera's art. Her paintings share with architecture structure, precision, and clarity. In 1939, Herrera moved to New York City, where she struggled to find like-minded artists and an audience for her work. It was only after moving to Paris in 1948 that she found the inspiration she'd been looking for and began to formulate her own minimalist abstract style. Her work soon became associated with hard-edge abstract painting, which is characterized by large, usually geometric forms with precise, razor-sharp contours and broad areas of bright, unmodulated colors. Two exemplars of this style are Ellsworth Kelly and Frank Stella, whose works are seen on this slide. Their paintings emphasized color and form and sought to elicit a visual rather than an emotional response to colors and shapes. After returning to New York in 1954, Herrera continued to be excluded from galleries and exhibitions. She's known for her legendary perseverance, however, and it wasn't until she was in her 70s that she began to be recognized. In fact, she sold her first painting at the age of 89 in 2004. The sale established her reputation as an important figure in minimalist abstraction. In 2016, the Whitney Museum in New York hosted a retrospective of Herrera's work. The New York Times headline read, "A 101-year-old artist finally gets her due at the Whitney." Not only had she achieved success in the art world, her influence also spread to the glamorous world of fashion. Herrera's Blanco y Verde series inspired the Swiss fashion designer Albert Kremler, who designed this dress in collaboration with Herrera for his 2017 collection. When Kremler saw an exhibition of Herrera's Blanco y Verde paintings, he was overwhelmed by her sense of color and proportion, which he called a blend of euphoria and perfect order. The dress, by the way, is displayed near Herrera's painting in Women Take the Floor. Carmen Herrera celebrated her 105th birthday in May of this year. She continues to produce work. Her secret? It's the beauty of the straight line that keeps me going. This seed jar was created in the early 1900s by the Hopi woman artist Nampeo, whose name translates to harmless snake. It's made of earthenware using the coil technique, in which long ropes of clay are formed into circles that are layered on top of one another and then smoothed over to create an even surface. The clay was then polished and painted with naturally dyed clay slip. And like her ancestors, Nampeo used an open fire as her kiln. With its large diameter, flattened shape, and relatively small opening, the vessel was designed to preserve its contents. 4 large white hook shapes encircle the upper half of the seed jar. The white shape is understood to represent the head of a bald eagle, a sacred bird in Hopi religion. Highly stylized birds such as this are a signature of Nampeo's style. An elongated black triangle swoops in from the right, its narrow point meeting the tip of the eagle's beak, resembling a shadow of the long hooked head. And just beneath the white hook, there's a grid with a black dot in each white square. This element of design is believed to represent seeds planted in a field. Nampeo began making pottery based on ancient fragments that she found near her Pueblo home in Hopi, Arizona. Although her work drew on these Hopi and ancient traditions, she didn't simply copy the painted designs of ancestral pottery. She used them as a springboard for her own innovative interpretations and techniques. Here we can compare Nampeo's early 20th century bowl to a bowl made by one of her ancestors about 700 years earlier. The similarities are striking. The colors are similar, and both are painted with bird imagery. Nampeo's angular eagle head, however, is more stylized, kind of more modern than the simple but realistic rendering of birds on the older vessel. We can see more of her unique style and updated designs on these 3 vessels, which are also in the MFA's collection. Traditionally, vessels such as the seed jar had functional roles, but they were later produced as items for trade and became a very important part of Puebloan economic life. And this was especially true after the introduction of the railroad in the late 1800s, which brought tourism to the Southwest. This is a photo of Nampeo. And early on in this burgeoning economy, Nampeo was singled out for the high quality of her pottery, and her name became widely recognized. Nampeo is credited with the revival of ancestral Puebloan pottery traditions. And for that, she has become an important symbol of the Hopi nation. The next stop on our tour is the painting we see on the left in this photo of a gallery in Women Take the Floor. From a distance, it looks like a desert landscape, a barren, treeless expanse with sand dunes against a blue sky. So let's take a closer look. The Venezuelan-born artist Lucita Hertado created this untitled painting around 1969. This apparent landscape uses a colorful graphic style in which a knee and a breast are transformed into sand dunes, while a navel appears as a hole in the ground. The toes rising in the distance remind us that what we're looking at is a body posing as a landscape. The composition is spare. We see the body clearly delineated against a vast sky, interrupted by the moon still visible in the daylight. The colors are bold and bright. The body is an earthy gold, unmodulated except for the shading that defines the body parts. The sky is bright blue, streaked with a barely discernible haze. The painting is a kind of self-portrait. So just imagine the artist lying on her back, looking down at her body with one knee raised, with the toes visible just below her belly. The perspective is foreshortened. That is, from this angle, the body appears shorter than it is in reality, making it seem compressed. In this case, it's the distance between the belly and the toes that is radically foreshortened. Hertado believes that nature and the body are connected, interchangeable. She cared deeply for the environment, a passion that is reflected in much of her art. In an interview for a 2018 exhibition at the Hammer Museum, she mused, "When they took a picture of the world in that black space, this tiny little blue ball, I thought, well, definitely, I'm the cousin of a tree. Everything here is part of me, and I'm a part of it." When I look at this painting, I like to believe that that's Lucita Hertado in the middle, with two of her tree cousins behind her. Although making art was a constant throughout Hurtado's life, she remained largely unrecognized until 2015, when a vast trove of her paintings and works on paper were discovered by her late husband's studio director, who found a dealer to exhibit her work. Critics took notice, and Hurtado became an overnight success. Granted, it was at the age of 95. Since her discovery, her art has been featured in several exhibitions, including the 2018 Made in LA Biennial at the Hammer Museum, and in 2019, the first international retrospective of her art at the Sackler Gallery in London and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Sadly, Lucita Hertado died in August of this year at the age of 99. She would have celebrated her 100th birthday on October 28th. We can all pay tribute to this beautiful person by heeding these words. When I think about my painting and the political and the planet, it's about the hope that it's not too late and that people can still get together and in whatever small way, make a difference that adds up. Hurtado's art is precise and graphic. By contrast, the art that we see in this gallery is abstract, loose, and gestural. This photograph highlights two artists who are participants in the abstract expressionist movement, a movement made famous in New York City in the 1940s by male artists such as Jackson Pollock and Franz Kline. The abstract expressionists are known for their energetic compositions that sprang forth from their personal impulses and emotions. The subject of their art was the paint itself and how it was applied to the canvas. Joan Mitchell painted Chamonix in the early 1960s. This is a very large painting. It's about 6.5 feet by 7 feet. And that's a size that if you were in the gallery and standing very close, it would completely fill your field of vision. Mitchell uses a limited color palette, primarily whites, grays, and black. But look closely. You'll see touches of green and yellow and blue. While this is a totally abstract composition, Mitchell's intent was to create an image that suggests the landscape of the French Alps. And when we look at Mitchell's painting next to a photograph of the Alps, it's not so far-fetched. The black jagged faces of the steep rock cliffs, the white snowfields, the slashes of bare rock interrupting the snowy slopes. In Mitchell's own words, she painted remembered landscapes that involve my feelings. In this work, her memory of the idyllic French Alps come together with anger and sadness over her father's recent death and her mother's cancer diagnosis. The somber colors and intense gestures reflect these emotions. A small section of the canvas, shown here on the right, taken approximately from the area marked by the yellow rectangle on the left, gives us a closer look at Mitchell's techniques for applying paint to the canvas. We can see multi-layered strokes, slashes, drips, smudges, and even fingerprints. In fact, it looks like she may have applied thick streaks of black paint with her fingers in this, as you can see in the circle, ending with impressions of her fingerprints. Although it appears to be spontaneous and unrestrained, Mitchell said that her process was actually slow, structured, and deliberate. involving careful planning and thought. The freedom in my work is quite controlled, she once said. I don't just close my eyes and hope for the best. Joan Mitchell achieved significant critical and commercial success in her lifetime, exhibiting regularly in New York and Paris throughout the later decades of her life. In Joan Mitchell's words, music, poems, landscape, and dogs make me want to paint, and painting is what allows me to survive. A group of ceramic vessels made by Toshiko Takiezu in the 1980s stands in perfect harmony with Mitchell's painting. Takiezu has created stoneware and porcelain vessels in a variety of shapes and sizes. They are closed forms in which shape and glaze combine seamlessly to convey mood and presence. Like her contemporaries, Takiezu splashed, dripped, brushed, and poured glaze colors onto the surface of her ceramics, applying techniques of abstract expressionist painting to three-dimensional forms. Her abstracted sculptural forms convey a sense of movement and spontaneity, as well as tranquility and contemplation. Takiezu's vessels were key works in the 20th century transformation of ceramic art from the production of functional objects to the creation of works meant to be seen rather than used. To impress upon her students the high calling of ceramics as fine art, she repeated the mantra, no ashtrays, no souvenirs. And so we're back where we began. There are many things we can do in a virtual tour such as this that we couldn't do in person, like looking at the back of Frida Kahlo's painting, or zooming in on Joan Mitchell's fingerprints, or looking at paintings from other museums. But nothing can replace the experience of looking at original art up close and in person. I hope you've been inspired to visit Women Take the Floor in person, which is on view at the Museum of Fine Arts through May 3rd, 2021. Thank you. And now Diane and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. So folks, at this point, if folks have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the chat. And we'll take, roughly 10, 15 minutes of questions. We'll take what you got. Laura, let me ask the first question. I'm assuming the museum is open right now. What should a visitor know? When are you open? What sort of limitations or restrictions are in place?
Okay, it's open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 5. You must get online tickets in advance. You can get time tickets every hour on the hour. You can get a general admission ticket, or else which includes Women Take the Floor, or you can get a ticket that's for general admission plus the Monet Exhibition, which is now open at the museum, or for general admission plus the Basquiat Exhibition, which is also open at the museum. So there's a lot to see there right now.
Great. And another question for you. So obviously, you had about 45 minutes to talk about Women Take the Floor. I'm sure there were lots of things that you had to leave out. Maybe, what are maybe one or two other things? Well, let me back up. So how many pieces of artwork do you think are in the exhibition? And maybe highlight one or two that you weren't able to cover before.
There are about 200 objects in the exhibition. I talked about 8, so there's quite a few more to see. I didn't mention, there's one, it's organized into different galleries, and each gallery had, like, one is Women Depicting Women, which is where the Frida Kahlo was. And one was Women of Action, which was where the Joan Mitchell was. There is also a gallery called, help me Diane, the Fiber exhibition.
It's called Subversive Threads.
Oh, yes. And so it has a lot of fiber art sculptures, some quite large and very beautiful. Let's see, what else did I not include? There's a whole gallery full of monoprints and printmaking by women artists. That's also quite spectacular. So it was a lot to see.
Wonderful. So again, let's read a couple of comments. Lovely, thank you. And thanks so much, very informative. Love the women artist stories. Wonderful. So of the 200 pieces, do you have a favorite?
You know what? After working on this tour, I have fallen in love with all those artists, especially Lucita Hertado and Carmen Herrera. I mean, they were not discovered until they were well into their 70s or 80s or 90s, but that didn't matter to them. What mattered to them was making art. And it was so personal and so, just so real to them. And so I have a real soft place in my heart for those two artists.
Wonderful. Well, we've given it a good few minutes. I don't see any questions. Every once in a while, Laura, we have a shy audience, so don't take it personally. You've already answered all their questions in your presentation.
Well, maybe Diane would like to mention some of her other favorite pieces.
Yes, I think that would be a great idea.
Okay, so I like Laura, I love the Lucita Hertado works. She was such a great artist. She actually painted at night after her children went to bed at her kitchen table. So it really shows you how devoted she was to her art. Again, like she said, decades of doing that before she was discovered in her 90s. In the Subversive Threads gallery, where the fiber art sculptures are, there's an artist, Sheila Hicks, and she does amazing installations that are as big as rooms. And we have some beautiful pieces of hers that are, she, instead of weaving something together like a macrame or a knitting project, she twists and turns the fibers and uses bright colors. And it has a very, it gives the impression of an impressionistic painting, which is absolutely, to me, very stunning. So I really enjoy her, especially because the fiber arts is pretty underappreciated. Everyone knows about paintings, but sculpture with fiber is something that we don't normally see in museums. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Diane. Laura, anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just encourage everyone to come to the museum. And as I said, the Monet Exhibition, which opened just a couple weeks ago, is truly fantastic. It includes all 35 of the paintings by Monet owned by the museum, plus a few that have been borrowed from private collections in the Boston area. It's just beautifully installed, and it's in very large galleries. They've paid attention to social distancing, so there's plenty of room. And they do also limit the number of people that enter the museum each hour. So.
Yeah, they've been very safety conscious. And I would also put in a plug to add that the tickets for December, they release them every month. They just went on sale this morning and they have been selling out. So if you're interested in going in December with your family, it would be really great to get online sooner rather than later to buy them.
Wonderful. And something I neglected to mention at the beginning is that the Tewksbury Library does subscribe to the Museum of Fine Arts Museum Pass program. I believe that's still active, and despite COVID, the pass admits up to 2 adults, seniors, or students at $10 per person. And I just posted what I think is the most up-to-date information in our chat. So folks can take a look at that, and you can request museum passes at tewksburypl.org and then click on museum passes. Something else I neglected to mention is everyone will be receiving an email from me tomorrow morning with a feedback survey. Please fill that out. Let me know what you thought of tonight's event, what you thought of the entire museum series, and what you'd like to see for future museum visits virtually via Zoom. So with that, Laura and Diane, any last words before we wrap up?
Thank you very much. A pleasure to join you, and I hope you all appreciated it. Thank you for having us.
And happy
Great. Lori says, oh, yep, Diane says thank you. So Lori says, great. Jan says, wonderful presenters. The passion came through. Thank you so much. Stay well. And Debbie, we'll end with Debbie's nice comment. The stories were inspiring and uplifting, much needed during this time. Thank you so much. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and I'm sure I'll see some of you soon via Zoom. Thanks again.
Thank you.